My name is Julia, 34 years old, a sergeant in the Army, and I used to believe the fiercest battlefield was across the ocean. But I was wrong. The real battlefield was right there on my Christmas dinner table. While I was carving the turkey, Brandon, my husband, and his best friend Nate smirked at each other. Brandon threw a yellow envelope down in front of me instead of a gift. He announced loudly in front of both our parents, "Let's get a divorce. You're too dry to be a real woman. I bet Nate $500 that you'll cry and beg me not to leave you right now." Their laughter felt like daggers in my heart. He thought I would collapse. He thought I was a defective doll. He had no idea that in the pocket of my dress uniform hanging on the chair, I had prepared a return gift. A gift that would wipe that arrogant smile off his face forever. Let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe right now if you believe traitors deserve to pay the price. This story is for you. I nervously smoothed down the fabric of my dress, a deep burgundy velvet number I'd bought specifically for this night. I was trying, perhaps a little too hard, to cover the yellowish-purple bruise blooming on my upper bicep. It was a souvenir from a tactical training exercise at Fort McCoy last week, a badge of honor in my unit, but here it was a flaw. Brandon hated my bruises. He told me they made me look like damaged goods, like something you'd find in the clearance bin. The dining room of our suburban Chicago home was suffocatingly warm, filled with the heavy, rich scents of roasted mushrooms, rosemary stuffing, and cinnamon sticks simmering in cider. It was the smell of a picture-perfect American Christmas, or at least the version of it you see in commercials. The crystal wine glasses chimed softly as my in-laws toasted to another successful year. My mother-in-law, a woman who valued net worth over human worth, was beaming at her son. "Brandon, honey, that year-end bonus is just spectacular," she cooed, swirling her Pinot Noir. "You really outdid yourself this quarter." They talked about him as if he were a god of finance, the provider of all things good. And me? I was just the army wife, the charity case he had graciously decided to shelter. I sat there, sipping my water, trying to make myself smaller. Across the table, Nate, Brandon's college friend and fellow stockbroker, was already 3 glasses deep into the expensive vintage Brandon had opened. There was a current of electricity running between the two men, a jagged, malicious energy that I, in my stupid, blind naivety, mistook for holiday cheer or just the buzz of the alcohol. I didn't realize the ground beneath my feet was already cracking. I didn't know I was standing at ground zero of a bomb that had been ticking for months. Then, the noise stopped. Brandon stood up. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against his crystal goblet. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp, high-pitched sound cut through the murmur of conversation. The room fell silent. My parents, sitting quietly at the end of the table, looked up expectantly, probably waiting for a toast to family, to health, to the future. Brandon placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm was heavy, but there was no warmth in it. It felt like a dead weight. "You know, everyone," he began, his voice smooth, practiced, the voice he used to close deals in boardrooms downtown. "Julia is a hell of a soldier. I'll give her that. She follows orders. She's disciplined." He paused for effect, looking around the table to ensure he had everyone's rapt attention. "But as a wife? Well," he let out a short, derisive chuckle. "She's about as warm and soft as a wooden plank. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm sleeping with a dude." The air left the room. My father dropped his fork, but Brandon wasn't done. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out that yellow envelope. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it. It didn't land politely. It slapped down onto my dinner plate, the corner dipping into the bright red cranberry sauce. The sauce splattered onto the velvet of my dress, staining it like fresh blood. "Divorce papers," Brandon said, his voice devoid of any emotion other than boredom. "Sign them. Nate, looks like I win the pot. Look at her face." He turned to his friend, grinning. "Pay up, buddy. $500 says she cracks." The silence that followed was deafening. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my lungs. My mother-in-law's mouth hung open, a perfect O of shock, but she didn't say a word. My own parents looked paralyzed, their eyes darting between me and Brandon, unable to process the sudden violence of the moment. No one spoke, no one stood up, no one defended me. My ears started to ring. A high-pitched whine that drowned out the crackling of the fireplace. Wooden plank, not a real woman. The words weren't just insults. They were precision strikes. They hurt more than the time I dislocated my shoulder during basic training. They hurt more than the frostbite I'd risked during winter drills. I looked around the table, desperate for an anchor, for someone to tell me this was a sick joke. But all I saw were distorted faces. Nate was laughing now, a guttural, ugly sound, raising his glass in a mock salute to Brandon's freedom. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the heavy oak table over, send the turkey and the crystal crashing to the floor. I wanted to cry, to let the hot tears burning behind my eyes spill over. But my body betrayed me. It went into absolute lockdown. It was the freeze response. I felt stripped naked, flayed open right there in front of the people who were supposed to love me. This wasn't a breakup. This wasn't a conversation about a marriage not working out. This was a public execution of my dignity. He had chosen this specific moment, this holy holiday, with our families watching, to murder my soul. He wanted an audience for my destruction. Brandon leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the sour tang of scotch on his breath, mixed with that expensive, overpowering cologne he wore. "What's the matter, Jules?" he whispered, his voice dripping with false concern that masked his cruelty. "Not going to cry? Or are you just too shocked to speak? Sign the damn papers so you can get out of my house. You're ruining the vibe." He pulled a Mont Blanc pen from his pocket and jammed it into my hand. The metal barrel of the pen was ice cold against my sweating palm. I looked down at the cranberry stain spreading on the yellow envelope. It looked like a wound. And in that split second, as my fingers curled around the pen, something inside of me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest. The part of me that was Julia. The wife who tried so hard to be soft, who hid her bruises, who cooked and cleaned and apologized for taking up space. That part of me died right there in the dining chair. But as she died, something else woke up. A primal survival instinct. I took a deep breath. The sharp scent of pine from the Christmas tree hit my nose, mixing with the nauseating smell of his cologne. I looked up at Brandon. I didn't look at him with the eyes of a heartbroken wife anymore. I didn't look at him with the confusion of a victim. I looked at him the way I'd been trained to look at a hostile target down the scope of an M4 carbine. My breathing slowed. My heart rate dropped. The ringing in my ears stopped, replaced by a cold, hyper-focused clarity. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the arrogance in his eyes. I saw the way his hand shook slightly as he held his wine glass, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of his cruelty. He was smiling that winning smile, the one that used to make my knees weak. But looking at it now, seeing the monster beneath the mask, my mind involuntarily drifted back to the first time I saw that smile, 3 years ago. Back when I thought it was love, not a trap. The memory pulled me back, dragging me 3 years into the past, like a riptide I couldn't swim against. Back then, I had just been promoted to sergeant. It was a huge day for me. I remember driving home from the base, my hands gripping the steering wheel, adrenaline still humming in my veins. I felt 10 feet tall. I had worked so hard for those stripes, enduring grueling physical training, sleepless nights, and deployments that tested every fiber of my being. I couldn't wait to tell Brandon. I imagined us popping a bottle of champagne, maybe going out to that little Italian steakhouse he liked downtown. I thought he would be proud. I thought he would see me the way I saw myself that day, capable, strong, accomplished. But when I walked through the front door, still wearing my OCPs, my operational camouflage pattern uniform, with my new rank pinned to my chest, the air in the house shifted instantly. Brandon was sitting on the leather couch in the living room, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, and his eyes didn't light up. They narrowed. He scanned me from my combat boots up to my messy bun, and his lip curled just slightly. "I got it," I beamed, unable to contain my excitement. "I made Sergeant, Brandon. Can you believe it?" He didn't stand up to hug me. He just took a sip of his scotch and sighed, a long, weary sound that deflated my joy instantly. You know, Julia, he said, his voice low and smooth, women with too much power. It's not really a turn-on for most guys. Seeing you in that getup, honestly, it makes me feel like I'm sleeping with a dude. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the entryway, my smile freezing and then crumbling. What? I'm just being honest, babe, he shrugged, turning back to his phone. I mean, look at you. You're all hard. Where's the softness? Where's the femininity? That single conversation planted a toxic seed in my brain that grew rapidly, choking out my self-esteem. From that day on, I started looking in the mirror differently. I stopped seeing muscles that could carry a wounded soldier to safety. I saw manly bulk. I stopped seeing calluses on my hands that proved my hard work. I saw rough, unlovable skin. Brandon didn't hit me with his fists. He didn't have to. He beat me down with comparisons. He would leave magazines open on the coffee table, GQ, Vogue, Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Edition. Always open to pages featuring impossibly slender, airbrushed women. He would scroll through Instagram while we were watching TV, lingering on photos of influencers with waist-length hair and perfect delicate features, making sure I saw what he was looking at. He was rewriting my reality, convincing me that my strength was actually my greatest flaw. The control started subtly, disguised as helpful advice. It began with my closet. Don't wear that, Jules, he'd say, wrinkling his nose at my favorite pair of jeans or a comfortable flannel shirt. It makes you look so wide. You look like a lumberjack. But I like this shirt, I'd protest weakly. I'm just trying to help you, he'd reply, his voice taking on that patronizing, patient tone. I want you to look your best. People talk, you know. I don't want them laughing at my wife. Slowly, my wardrobe changed. The jeans and boots disappeared, replaced by flimsy silk slip dresses that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. He insisted on heels, even though they hurt my feet after years of wearing combat boots. Wear the silk, he'd insist before we went out to dinner. Hide those shoulders. Soften up a bit. I obeyed. I became a doll in his hands, constantly trying to whittle myself down to fit the mold of the perfect wife he had created in his head. Every time I tried to push back, every time I said I wasn't comfortable, he would gaslight me. You're so insecure, Julia, he would say, shaking his head. Without me, who would even look at you? You're lucky I like strong women, even if you take it too far sometimes. No one else would put up with a soldier wife. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I started to think I was lucky. I started to think that my career, my service, was a burden he was graciously tolerating. My confidence, once solid as a rock, eroded into dust. It wasn't just my appearance he attacked. He went after my support system too. He systematically cut me off from the only people who truly understood me, my unit. Whenever my squad mates would text about a reunion or a casual night at the local bar, Brandon would sigh loudly. Again? You're going to hang out with those rude, loudmouth grunts again? They're my friends, Brandon, I'd say. They're my brothers and sisters. They're uncivilized, he'd sneer. All they talk about is war and guns. It's depressing. Besides, don't you want to spend time with me? Isn't your husband enough for you? The guilt trips were relentless. Eventually, it was just easier to say no. I started declining invitations. I stopped answering calls. I isolated myself in our cold, expansive suburban mansion, surrounded by expensive furniture that I was terrified of scratching. I missed the raucous laughter of the barracks. I missed the absolute trust of having someone watch your six. But I was terrified of making Brandon unhappy. I was terrified he would leave me, confirming his words that I was unlovable. I even packed away my commendation medals, my ribbons, and my challenge coins. I used to display them proudly on the mantle. One day, Brandon told me they were aggressive and violent decor that didn't match the minimalist aesthetic of the living room. So, I wrapped them in tissue paper and shoved them into a shoebox at the bottom of the guest room closet. I hid my glory to protect his fragile ego. I traded my entire world just to keep a man who never truly valued me. The breaking point, though I didn't realize it at the time, was his company's holiday mixer last month. It was a swanky affair at a rooftop bar in downtown Chicago. Men in three-piece suits, women in designer gowns, servers passing around tiny appetizers I couldn't identify. Brandon had insisted I wear a dress that was too tight and heels that were too high. I felt like an imposter. He was introducing me to a senior partner at his firm. "This is Julia, my wife," Brandon said, his arm heavy around my waist, fingers digging slightly into my side. "Pleasure," the partner said, raising an eyebrow. "Brandon tells me you're in the army? That's intense." Brandon laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, she is, but don't worry." He winked at his boss. "At home, she's obedient as a puppy. She knows who the alpha is." The group of men roared with laughter. My face burned. I stood there, clutching my glass of champagne so hard I thought the stem might snap. I wanted to slap him. I wanted to pour my drink over his head and scream that I was a sergeant in the United States Army, not a house pet. But the fear, programmed into me over 3 years of subtle emotional abuse, paralyzed me. I just looked down at the floor and forced a tight, painful smile. I felt small. I felt erased. That night, back at the house, I locked myself in the master bathroom. I sat on the cold tile floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and I wept. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the makeup smeared, the expensive dress wrinkled, and I asked myself where the hell the strong, fearless girl from 3 years ago had gone. Had she died in the desert? Or had she died here, in this beautiful, suffocating house? Brandon knocked on the door. Not a gentle knock, but a sharp, impatient rap. "Julia, are you crying in there?" "Go away," I choked out. "Jesus, stop with the waterworks," he said through the door, his voice cold and annoyed. "You're being dramatic. You're ruining my good mood after a great night. Grow up." He walked away. I heard his footsteps fading down the hall. He didn't care. He didn't love me. He loved owning me. He loved having a soldier wife he could trot out like a party trick and then belittle to make himself feel bigger. If you have ever felt like you were losing yourself in a relationship, or if someone has tried to dim your light just to make themselves shine brighter, please hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type, "I am enough." Type it in all caps. Let's remind each other that we define our own worth, not anyone else. As I sat on that bathroom floor, wiping my eyes, a terrible, nagging question echoed in my mind. It was the voice of the gaslighting, whispering to me, "Is he right? Am I just overreacting? Am I really just a broken, masculine, unlovable mess like he says? Maybe I am the problem." I went to bed that night feeling heavier than I ever had in full combat gear. I fell asleep, wishing I could just disappear. But I didn't know that the universe, or maybe just dumb luck, was about to hand me the answer to my question. And it wasn't going to be pretty. 2 weeks before Christmas, the facade finally cracked. It was a Tuesday night, bitterly cold, with snow piling up against the windows of our suburban home. Brandon came home late, stumbling through the front door around 11 p.m. He'd texted me earlier, the usual excuse. Year-end closing, piles of paperwork, don't wait up. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book under the dim light of a floor lamp, when he walked in. He didn't look like a man who had been drowning in spreadsheets. His face was flushed, his tie was loosened, and he had that glassy-eyed look of someone who had consumed half a bottle of expensive liquor. "Hey," he grunted, tossing his briefcase onto the armchair. He made a beeline for the stairs, clearly trying to avoid any real interaction. Exhausted, going to bed. But as he brushed past me, the air shifted. My soldier's instinct, that gut feeling that had kept me alive on patrol in hostile territories, flared up instantly. It wasn't a sound or a sight, it was a smell. It wasn't the scent of stale office coffee or laser printer toner. It was a thick, cloying wave of Chanel No. 5. I froze. I knew that scent. I knew it because 2 years ago, for our anniversary, I'd picked up a bottle of it at Macy's, thinking it would make me feel elegant. Brandon had wrinkled his nose when I sprayed a tester card. "Ugh, put that back," he'd sneered. "That smells like a cheap French hooker. It's tacky, Julia. Don't waste my money on that. Now he reeked of it. I stood up, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Brandon. He stopped on the third step, his hand gripping the railing too tightly. He didn't turn around. What? You smell strong, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Did you spill something? Just some client's wife at the office party. Hugged me too long. You know how it is. He waved a dismissive hand and hurried up the stairs. I followed him, silent as a shadow. I watched from the doorway of our master bedroom as he stripped off his shirt. He tossed it into the hamper with unusual force. But before it landed, I saw it. Under the bright recessed lighting of the walk-in closet, there was a smudge on the collar of his pristine white Brooks Brothers shirt. It was faint, a beige-pink blur against the crisp cotton. Foundation, makeup. My chest tightened, but it wasn't jealousy. Jealousy implies you're afraid of losing something valuable. This was different. This was disgust. Pure, unadulterated contempt. He was so sloppy. He was so arrogant that he didn't even bother to check his own collar before coming home to his wife. He thought I was so stupid, so blindly devoted, that I wouldn't notice the neon sign flashing adultery right in front of my face. Brandon didn't even shower. He just pulled on a t-shirt, collapsed into bed, and within minutes, the room was filled with the sound of his heavy, alcohol-fueled snoring. I stood there in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind howl outside. Then, I saw it. His phone. It was sitting on the nightstand, plugged into the charger. And just like that, the screen lit up. Buzz, a notification. I had never checked Brandon's phone. Not once in 5 years. I respected privacy. I believed in trust. But tonight, the rules of engagement had changed. I walked over to his side of the bed, my movements precise and silent. I looked down at the screen. It wasn't a client, it was a contact saved simply as M. The message preview read, "Did you tell that soldier grunt yet? I'm tired of sneaking around. You promised me my Christmas gift would be your freedom." The blood roared in my ears. That soldier grunt. Is that what he called me? To her? To this M? He took the title I'd earned with blood, sweat, and tears. The career that paid for half of this house, the service that kept this country safe while he pushed papers, and he turned it into a slur to entertain his mistress. He reduced my sacrifice to a punchline. My hand moved on its own. I picked up the phone. He hadn't even locked it. Why would he? He thought the obedient puppy would never dare to snoop. I swiped open the message thread. It was a cesspool, months of texts, photos of them at dinners I wasn't invited to, check-ins at hotels while I was supposedly boring him at home. They laughed about how gullible I was. "She thinks I'm working late again, LOL," one text from him read. "God, she's so dense. It's like living with a drill sergeant who has no brain." But then, my thumb scrolled up, and I saw a conversation with Nate. My breath hitched. "Nate, dude, you're not gonna do it. You don't have the balls. Your wife is built like a tank. She'll snap you in half. Brandon, watch me. $500 says I do it at Christmas dinner. I'm gonna serve her the papers right there. It'll be hilarious." Nate, "No way. That's brutal." Brandon, "It's necessary. She needs to be put in her place. I bet you another $500 she cries like a baby. She puts on this tough act, but inside, she's weak. She's pathetic. She'll be on her knees begging me to stay within a minute." Nate, "You're on. Easy money." I almost dropped the phone. The room spun. It wasn't just cheating. It was a game. My life, my marriage, my pain. It was all just a wager. A $500 bet between two frat boys in grown-up suits. They were going to turn my heartbreak into dinner theater. I scrolled further back. I saw messages about money. Brandon complaining about my army pay. "Her paycheck is chump change," he wrote to M. "But hey, at least it pays the electric bill while I use my bonus on you, babe. Just bought you that bracelet. Don't tell the grunt." He was using my money. The money I earned freezing and training exercises, the money I saved by couponing and living simply, to buy jewelry for the woman he was sleeping with in my bed. I carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly at the angle I found it. I took a step back and looked at the lump under the duvet. The man I had vowed to love and cherish. The man I had tried to change myself for. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the heartbreak to cripple me like it did 3 years ago in the bathroom. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a strange, cold calm washed over me. It was a sensation I knew well. It was the feeling that descends right before a mission starts. The fear evaporates. The noise fades. The world narrows down to a single objective. The Julia who cooked dinner and worried about wrinkles and tried to wear silk dresses. She died in that bedroom, right alongside her marriage. The woman standing there in the dark was Sergeant Gibson. And she was looking at an enemy combatant. I didn't scream. I didn't wake him up and demand answers. That's what a victim would do. That's what the emotional woman he bet on would do. I reached into the pocket of my pajama pants and pulled out my own phone. With steady hands, I took photos of every single text message. The conversations with M, the bet with Nate, the insults, the financial admissions. I scrolled, snapped, scrolled, snapped. Every click of the camera was a bullet loading into a magazine. I opened my secure cloud storage, the encrypted one I used for military documents, and uploaded everything. I sent a copy to a hidden email address Brandon didn't know existed. When the upload bar hit 100%, I put my phone away. I looked at Brandon one last time. He mumbled something in his sleep and rolled over, completely oblivious that the roof was about to cave in on him. He thought he was the hunter. He thought he was playing a game with a dumb animal. He forgot one thing. You don't corner a soldier. And you certainly don't bet against the house when the house is armed. I walked out of the bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. I went downstairs to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out at the snowy driveway. The OODA loop was complete. I had observed. I had oriented. Now, it was time to decide and act. I knew exactly where I had to go. It was 1 a.m., and the roads were icy, but I didn't care. I grabbed my keys and my heavy winter coat. The counteroffensive had officially begun. I drove through the blinding snowstorm, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The heater in my old Jeep was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. It wasn't the Chicago winter that chilled me. It was the icy realization of what my life had become. I was heading to the one place I knew was safe, Jenny's apartment. Jenny and I went way back. She was a former JAG officer, Judge Advocate General's Corps, which meant she was a lawyer who spoke 2 languages fluently, the rigid black and white language of the law and the chaotic, gritty language of the soldier. She was the only person who understood both halves of me. When she opened the door to her cozy, cluttered apartment in Wicker Park, she didn't say a word. She took one look at my face, pale, eyes wide with shock, snow melting in my hair, and she knew. She pulled me inside, shutting the door firmly against the howling wind. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to her worn-out sofa. She walked straight to her liquor cabinet and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy glass. Bourbon. Neat. She shoved it into my hand. Drink, then talk. I took a sip. The burn was grounding. "He's cheating on me, Jen, with someone named M. And he bet on it. He bet $500 with Nate that he could make me cry and beg when he serves me divorce papers at Christmas dinner." Jenny's face didn't register surprise. As a divorce attorney, she'd seen the worst of humanity. But her eyes hardened. Her jaw set tight. She looked like she was ready to punch a hole in the wall. "I knew he was a narcissist," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "But betting on your pain? Making it a spectator sport? That's a new level of depraved." She sat down opposite me, leaning forward, elbows on her knees. "Show me." I handed her my phone, scrolling through the screenshots I had just taken. Jenny read them in silence. Occasionally, she would mutter a curse word under her breath. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes blazing. "Okay," she said, handing the phone back. "He wants to play a game? He wants to humiliate you publicly? Fine, we're going to play. But we're playing by my rules now. She stood up and swept a pile of magazines off her coffee table, replacing them with a legal pad and a pen. The transformation was instant. She wasn't just my friend anymore, she was a shark smelling blood in the water. Here's the reality, Julia, she began, her pen scratching furiously on the paper. We're in Illinois. It's an equitable distribution state, but fault can still play a role if we play our cards right. However, adultery alone isn't always enough to strip him of everything, especially since he's a finance guy. He knows how to hide assets. He's probably got offshore accounts or crypto wallets you don't even know about. My heart sank. So what do I do? Just let him win? Let him laugh at me while he kicks me out? No, Jenny snapped, looking up. A sharp, predatory smile curled her lips. We need him to voluntarily sign his own death warrant. We need a post-nuptial agreement. A what? A post-nup. It's like a prenup, but you sign it after you're married. Listen to me. Brandon is arrogant. That's his Achilles' heel. He thinks you're stupid. He thinks you're desperate to keep him. We are going to use that hubris against him. She started outlining the plan. It was brilliant, and it was terrifying. We create a document that looks like you're giving up. You tell him you feel guilty about your low income. You tell him you want to sign an agreement stating that all his future earnings are his just to prove you're not a gold digger. He'll love that. It strokes his ego. But, I started. But, Jenny interrupted, tapping the paper with her pen. We bury a poison pill in the fine print, a clause that says if either party files for divorce without mutual consent, or if there is proof of infidelity prior to the filing, the other party is entitled to a massive penalty payout. We're talking 80% of assets and lifetime alimony. We make the language dense, boring, and legalistic. He won't read it. He's too busy texting his mistress and planning his little victory dinner. I stared at her. You really think he'll sign it? He's a narcissist, Julia, Jenny said. He believes he's untouchable. He believes he's the smartest guy in the room. He'll sign it because he thinks he's tricking you into waiving your rights. He won't realize he's signing away his life until the trap snaps shut. I slumped back against the cushions. I don't know, Jen. It feels dishonest. I'm a soldier. I face things head on. Jenny stood up and walked over to me. She grabbed my shoulders and shook me gently. Stop it. Drop that good wife act right now. Look in that mirror over there. I looked. I saw a woman with dark circles under her eyes, slumped shoulders, and a face etched with fear. That's not you, Jenny said firmly. You are Sergeant Julia Gibson. I watched you lead a platoon through a sandstorm in Iraq when our comms were down. I watched you carry a 100-pound rucksack when the men were falling out. Why are you letting a glorified stockbroker who uses hair gel scare you? Her words were like a bucket of ice water. She was right. Somewhere between the silk dresses and the society dinners, I had forgotten who I was. I had let Brandon convince me I was weak, simply because I loved him. I stood up. I rolled my shoulders back. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of Jenny's apartment. Old books, bourbon, and fierce loyalty. I looked in the mirror again. The fear was still there, but behind it, something harder was emerging. Steel. I'll do it, I said. My voice didn't shake. I'll do whatever it takes. Jenny nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, go home. And here is the hardest part. You have to act. You have to go back into that house and be the submissive, scared little wife he thinks you are. You have to cook his breakfast, iron his shirts, and smile when he insults you. Because every time he underestimates you, he digs his grave a little deeper. I drove home in the pre-dawn light. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in a quiet, white blanket. I turned on the radio to keep myself awake. A rerun of a TED Talk by Brené Brown was playing. Her voice filled the cab of my truck. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen, she said. Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. I realized then that my pain wasn't a weakness. My heartbreak wasn't a defect. It was fuel. I pulled into the driveway of the mansion that felt more like a prison than a home. The windows were dark. Brandon was inside, sleeping the sleep of the unburdened. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence for a moment. I wasn't trembling anymore. A cold, calculated calm settled over me, sliding down my spine like armor. I was going into undercover operations in my own home. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I would be the perfect wife. I would be the wooden plank he complained about. I would feed his ego until it was so fat and bloated it blinded him completely. I walked into the kitchen and started making coffee, just like I did every morning. But as I measured out the grounds, I wasn't thinking about caffeine. I was thinking about the contract Jenny was drafting. I was thinking about the look on his face when the trap finally sprung. Patience. That was the sniper's greatest weapon. You don't shoot when you see the target. You shoot when the wind is right, when the breath is held, when the outcome is inevitable. I could wait. I could play the role of a lifetime. Because I knew how the movie ended. And spoiler alert, the bad guy doesn't win. 1 week before Christmas, I initiated the psychological operation. In the military, we call it PSYOPs, using information and indicators to influence the reasoning and behavior of the enemy. The enemy was currently sitting on our living room sofa, watching football and drinking a craft beer. I had spent the last few days practicing my demeanor. I needed to be pathetic. I needed to be the insecure, clingy, financially dependent wife he believed I was. I walked into the room, wringing my hands, my shoulders hunched. I was wearing one of the old, oversized sweaters he hated, looking intentionally disheveled. "Brandon?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Can we talk? Just for a minute?" He didn't look away from the TV screen. "Can it wait, Julia? The Bears are down by 3. It's important," I stammered. "It's about us. About money." That got his attention. He muted the TV and turned to me, an expression of annoyance already plastered on his face. "What about money? Did you overspend the grocery budget again? I told you, that army paycheck of yours is basically pocket change. You need to be careful." I swallowed my rage. It tasted like bile. "No, it's not that. It's just... I know I'm a burden to you, Brandon. I know I don't contribute enough to this lifestyle. And I've been so scared lately that you're going to get tired of carrying me. I'm terrified you'll think I'm just a gold digger." Brandon snorted, a cruel, barking laugh. He took a sip of his beer, looking me up and down with amusement. "Well, at least you're self-aware, babe. You're lucky to have landed me. Most guys in my tax bracket wouldn't put up with a wife who brings home a government salary. But hey, I'm a generous guy." I lowered my head, hiding the sharp, involuntary twitch of my lip. "That's why I want to do something. To prove to you that I'm not here for your money. I want us to sign an agreement, a post-nuptial agreement." He raised an eyebrow. "A post-nup? You want to sign a post-nup? Why?" "So you know I'm not trying to take anything from you," I said, looking up at him with wide, pleading eyes. "I want you to feel safe. I want you to know that your bonuses, your investments, they're yours. Even if you decide one day that I'm not enough for you anymore." I pulled the document out of a manila folder I was holding. Jenny had drafted it perfectly. It was thick, printed on heavy bond paper, and filled with dense legalese. The title page read in bold, capital letters, "Agreement regarding separate property and waiver of spousal claims." It looked exactly like a document designed to strip me of my rights. Brandon reached out and took it. "Well, well," he said, a smirk spreading across his face. "Look at you, trying to be a good little wife. This is surprisingly mature of you, Julia." He flipped through the first few pages. Jenny had front-loaded the document with clauses that reaffirmed his ownership of his pre-marital assets and his 401k. He nodded along, clearly liking what he saw. "Yeah, this looks standard. My stock options are protected. The vacation home is listed as separate property. Okay." He was scanning, not reading. He was too arrogant to believe that his stupid wife could possibly outsmart him. He assumed I had just downloaded a template from the internet. "It's just to make you happy," I whispered. He reached page 5. This was the kill zone. Buried in the middle of a paragraph about equitable distribution waivers was Clause 12. Jenny had written it in the most boring circular legal language possible, but its meaning was lethal. It stated, notwithstanding the foregoing, in the event that one party files a petition for dissolution of marriage unilaterally and without the prior written consent of the other party, or on the grounds of irreconcilable differences where no fault is proven, said filing party shall forfeit all claims to separate property protections and shall be liable to the non-filing party for a sum equal to 80% of the total marital and separate estate, plus lifetime spousal support, calculated at 40% of gross annual income. In plain English, if he divorced me without my permission, or just because he was bored, he would lose almost everything. Brandon's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it. A text from M. I saw the notification pop up. Miss you, can't wait for next week. He smiled at the phone, then looked back at the document, his eyes glazing over the dense text of Clause 12. Yeah, looks fine, he said, dismissing the page with a wave of his hand. He was distracted. He was thinking about his mistress. He was thinking about the new life he was going to start as soon as he kicked me out. And here I was, handing him a document that he thought would make that process cheaper and easier. He didn't see a trap. He saw a shortcut. Do you have a pen? He asked. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Right here. I handed him a blue ballpoint pen. He flipped to the signature page. He didn't even hesitate. He scrawled his signature, Brandon Miller, with a flourish. The ink was blue. The trap was set. There, he said, tossing the document back onto the coffee table. He picked up his phone to text M back. You're silly for worrying about this, Julia, but if it makes you feel better, fine. You're cute when you try to understand finance. He lifted his wrist to check the time, and the light caught the bezel of his new watch, a Rolex Submariner. It was worth at least $10,000. He had bought it last week, claiming it was a necessary business expense to impress clients. Meanwhile, I was still using an iPhone 8 with a cracked screen because he said upgrading was a waste of resources. Oh, he added, not looking up, make sure you get that notarized tomorrow. Don't just leave it lying around. I want this official. I will, I said softly. I have an appointment with a notary at the bank in the morning. Good girl. He went back to his phone. I picked up the document. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from a rush of adrenaline so potent it made me dizzy. I was holding his financial death warrant. He had signed it while laughing at me. He had signed it while wearing a watch bought with our money, while texting the woman he was cheating on me with. The hubris. The absolute, blinding arrogance of the man. He thought he was the predator, playing with his food. He didn't realize the food was laced with cyanide. I'm going to go put this away, I said. Yeah, go ahead, he muttered. And hey, bring me another beer while you're up. And maybe iron my gray suit for tomorrow. I have a big meeting. Of course, honey. I walked out of the living room, clutching the folder to my chest. As soon as I was out of his line of sight, in the hallway, my posture changed. I straightened my spine. The pathetic, hunched-over wife vanished. I walked into the study and opened the small fireproof safe we kept in the closet. I placed the document inside, right on top of my DD-214 and my service records. It looked innocent sitting there, just a stack of paper. But I knew what it was. It was a bomb. And the timer was set for Christmas dinner. I closed the heavy door of the safe and spun the dial, locking it tight. Click, click, click. I hope that paper makes you stop moping around, Brandon yelled from the living room. You've been a real drag lately. I looked at the closed safe door. A cold, hard smile touched my lips. A smile he would never see until it was too late. Don't worry, Brandon, I whispered to the empty room. I'm done moping. I'm just getting started. I went to the kitchen to get his beer. I would play the servant for a few more days. I would iron his suit. I would endure his insults. Because I knew something he didn't. I knew that the man sitting on my couch, the man who thought he owned the world, had just signed over his entire kingdom to the woman he called stupid. And on Christmas, I was going to collect. The dining room was silent, save for the crackling of the fireplace. All eyes were on me. My mother-in-law was clutching her pearls, practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the waterworks to start. Nate was leaning forward in his chair, grinning like a hyena, his phone probably ready under the table to record my meltdown. Brandon stood over me, that smug, victorious smirk plastered on his face, expecting me to shatter into a million pieces. They were all waiting for the victim. But the victim wasn't here anymore. I looked down at the divorce papers lying in the cranberry sauce. The yellow envelope was stained red, like a casualty of war. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen Brandon had jammed into my hand. The metal was cold, heavy, and expensive, just like everything else in his life. I didn't tremble. My hand was as steady as a rock. I uncapped the pen, and the sound was sharp in the quiet room. Click. I pressed the nib to the paper. I didn't read a word. I didn't need to. I signed my name, Julia Gibson. Not Julia Miller, Julia Gibson. I underlined it with a single, decisive stroke that cut through the paper like a blade. Then, I capped the pen. Snap. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel hitting the bench. I slid the papers back across the polished oak table, pushing them right up to the edge of Brandon's plate. I looked him dead in the eye, my face completely devoid of emotion. Done, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly to every corner of the room. Congratulations, Brandon. You're a free man. The smirk on Brandon's face faltered. It didn't disappear completely, but it froze, twitching at the corners like a glitching video. He blinked, confused. This wasn't in the script. I was supposed to be sobbing. I was supposed to be begging him to reconsider, asking him how I would survive without his money. Nate's jaw literally dropped. He looked from Brandon to me and back again, his easy money bet suddenly looking a lot less secure. My mother-in-law gasped, dropping her silver fork onto her china plate with a loud clang that made everyone jump. Julia, she exclaimed, scandalized. Is that it? You're not even going to fight for your marriage, after everything my son has done for you. I ignored her. My focus was entirely on the target. Brandon picked up the papers, staring at my signature as if it were written in an alien language. You didn't even read it, he stammered, his smooth boardroom voice cracking. Are you crazy? Do you have any idea what you just signed? You're walking away with nothing. You're going to be homeless. Panic was starting to seep into his eyes. It wasn't concern for me, it was fear of the unknown. Narcissists need a reaction. They need fuel. And I was giving him nothing but a vacuum. He realized in that moment that he had lost control of the narrative. Actually, I said, standing up slowly. I smoothed the front of my uniform, standing at full attention. I let my voice drop an octave, adopting the tone I used when addressing a formation of new recruits, the command voice. It demands obedience. It does not ask questions. Wait a minute, Brandon. He flinched. You gave me a gift, I continued, gesturing to the stained divorce papers. And it is only polite, especially at Christmas, to return the favor. I have a gift for you, too. I bent down. From beneath my chair, where I had hidden it before dinner, I pulled out a black leather portfolio. It wasn't wrapped in shiny paper. It didn't have a bow. It looked exactly what it was. Official, serious, and dangerous. I tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood with a hiss, stopping inches from Brandon's wineglass. Open it, I ordered. I think you'll find this gift is worth a lot more than the $500 you and Nate bet on my tears. Brandon stared at the black folder like it was a bomb. His hands were shaking now, visibly shaking. He reached out and flipped open the cover. The first page was a certified copy of a legal document. The title was printed in bold, undeniable letters. Enforcement of Post-Nuptial Agreement and Petition for Asset Forfeiture. Brandon's face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white in the span of a second. He started flipping through the pages, his eyes darting frantically back and forth, scanning the text like a trapped animal looking for an exit. What is this? He whispered. Keep reading, I said coldly. Page 5, Clause 12. He flipped to page 5. I knew exactly what he was seeing. He was seeing his own signature, bold and blue, notarized and stamped. He was seeing the clause he had laughed at a week ago. In the event that one party files a petition for dissolution of marriage unilaterally, said filing party shall forfeit all claims, liable for a sum equal to 80% of the total marital and separate estate. You tricked me, he shrieked, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. This says if I file for divorce, I lose 80%. 80%, Julia. I didn't trick you, Brandon, I said, leaning forward, resting my knuckles on the table. You signed it. You wanted to protect your assets from a gold digger, remember? You were so arrogant, so sure that I was the stupid one, that you didn't even bother to read what you were signing. I pointed a finger at the divorce papers he had thrown at me. And tonight, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip, you just activated the penalty clause. You filed for divorce unilaterally in front of witnesses. Your parents saw it. My parents saw it. Nate saw it. I looked at Nate, who was now shrinking back in his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. You are in breach of contract, Brandon, I said, a small icy smile finally touching my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of a soldier standing over a defeated enemy. You didn't just lose your wife tonight. You lost your house. You lost your stock portfolio. You lost your retirement. You lost everything. The room spun into chaos. My mother-in-law started screaming at my father-in-law to do something. Nate was furiously typing on his phone, probably texting his broker to see if he could liquidate his own assets before guilt by association took him down. But I just stood there, calm amidst the storm. I remembered the words of the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. I had found my strength, and I had used it to crush him. If you are cheering for Julia right now, hit that like button. Let's show the world that integrity wins over arrogance every time. And in the comments, I want you to type checkmate. Because sometimes the best move is letting your opponent defeat themselves. Brandon slumped into his chair, the black folder slipping from his fingers. He looked small. He looked broken. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more round in the chamber. One more secret that was going to turn his financial ruin into a lifetime sentence. Brandon slammed his hands onto the table, rattling the silverware. You tricked me, he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. You manipulative bitch! You set me up! He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes wide and wild. The smooth, confident executive who had walked into this room an hour ago was gone, replaced by a desperate man watching his life disintegrate in real time. Nate, who had been so eager to laugh at my expense just moments ago, snatched the black folder from the table. He scanned the legal jargon, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. Brandon. Nate's voice was a hoarse whisper. Dude, you're screwed. This is watertight. The forfeiture clause. It includes your stock options. It includes the equity in the house. It includes your 401k. He looked up at his friend with genuine horror. You just signed away 80% of your net worth. My mother-in-law stood up, knocking her chair over. You gold digger, she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. I knew it. I knew you were trash. You planned this. You're trying to steal my son's hard-earned money. The insults rained down on me like hail, liar, thief, snake. But I sat there, calm and composed, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. The expensive Cabernet had never tasted so sweet. It tasted like justice. I didn't steal anything, I said, setting the glass down gently. I didn't force his hand. He drafted the divorce papers. He threw them at me. He publicly humiliated me to win a $500 bet. The law's very clear about contracts, Brandon. You signed it. You triggered it. Don't be mad at the game just because you lost. Brandon slumped back into his chair, breathing heavily. I'll fight it, he muttered, though he sounded unconvinced. I'll get the best lawyers in Chicago. I'll bury you in litigation until you're broke. With what money? I asked coolly. 80% of your assets are frozen as of this moment. No lawyer is going to take your case on a contingency basis when they see this contract. He stared at me, hate burning in his eyes. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. The Ace of Spades, the card that would ensure he never, ever recovered. But that's not all, I said. My voice softened, becoming almost gentle, which made the silence in the room even more terrifying. I placed my hand protectively over my stomach. The gesture was small, but it sucked the oxygen right out of the room. My mother-in-law stopped screaming. Brandon froze. Even Nate stopped his frantic texting. With my other hand, I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a glossy black and white square. An ultrasound photo. "I'm pregnant," I announced. 8 weeks. I slid the photo across the table. It came to rest right next to the divorce papers. Brandon looked at the grainy image of the tiny bean-shaped life, and then he looked at my stomach. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. What? What? You remember how you always told me we couldn't afford kids? I said, my voice dripping with irony. How you said they were too expensive and would ruin your lifestyle. Well, surprise. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Here's how Illinois state law works, Brandon. Child support is calculated based on the non-custodial parent's gross income. Not net. Gross. And since you just forfeited 80% of your assets, you won't have much of a nest egg to fall back on. Plus, the alimony clause in the post-nup is for lifetime support. I did the mental math for him, ticking points off on my fingers. So let's see. You lose the house, you lose your savings, you lose your stocks, and from whatever paycheck you have left after taxes, the state is going to garnish wages for child support and alimony before you even see a dime. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Congratulations, Brandon. You're about to be homeless. The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might pass out. He collapsed back into his chair, staring at the ceiling as if praying for a meteor to strike the house and end his misery. This wasn't just financial ruin. This was a life sentence. He was tied to me, the woman he despised, the woman he had mocked, for the next 18 years minimum. Every paycheck he earned for the rest of his life would have my name on it. He looked over at Nate, desperation in his eyes. Nate, can I crash at your place for a bit? Just until I sort this out? Nate, the best friend, the partner in crime, immediately recoiled. He stood up, grabbing his coat off the back of his chair. Actually, man, my place is really small right now. And my girlfriend, she's allergic to drama. Sorry, dude. He was backing away from the table, putting distance between himself and the sinking ship that was Brandon Miller. And don't think M is going to save you, I added, twisting the knife. Do you really think a woman who helps you cheat on your wife is going to stick around for a man with zero assets, massive debt, and a baby on the way? She liked you for your wallet, Brandon. And your wallet just flatlined. Brandon put his head in his hands. A low moan escaped his lips. He was completely destroyed. Financially, socially, romantically. I had taken everything without firing a single shot. I stood up. The movement was sharp and commanded attention. I picked up my wine glass, which still had a generous amount of deep red liquid in it. I turned to Nate, who was trying to slink toward the door. Hey, Nate, I called out. He turned around, eyes wide with fear. Yeah? You forgot your winnings. I drew my arm back and splashed the contents of the glass squarely into his face. The wine hit him with a satisfying splat, drenching his expensive silk tie and dripping down his shocked face like blood. He sputtered, wiping his eyes, but he didn't dare say a word. He knew he deserved it. That's your $500, I said. Keep the change. Maybe you can use it to buy some sleeping pills for your buddy. He's going to need them. I set the empty glass down on the table with a decisive clink. Then I turned my back on the chaos, on my weeping mother-in-law, on the wine-soaked coward, and on the broken man huddled in his chair. I walked over to Brandon, leaning down one last time so only he could hear me. He smelled like fear now. The expensive cologne couldn't mask it. You were right about one thing, Brandon, I whispered. I am a soldier. And a soldier never goes into battle without a plan B. You lost the moment you thought I was weak. I straightened up, feeling lighter than I had in years. The air in the room was thick with the wreckage of his life, but for me, it was the first breath of fresh air I'd had in a long time. I looked at the door. It was time to clear the battlefield. The silence that followed my revelation was thick, heavy, and suffocating. But unlike before, the weight wasn't on my chest. It was crushing them. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. "Well," I said, checking the time as if I had a train to catch. "According to the contract you signed, effective immediately upon filing for divorce, exclusive residency rights transfer to the non-filing party." "That's me." I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every single person who had watched me bleed without lifting a finger. "This house belongs to me now. So I'm going to have to ask all of you to leave. Right now." For a second, nobody moved. They were too stunned. Then, my mother-in-law found her voice, her face contorted into an ugly mask of rage. "How dare you?" she screeched, stepping toward me. "You can't kick us out. This is my son's house. You ungrateful little—" I didn't let her finish. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tapped 3 numbers. I put it on speakerphone so they could all hear the ring. 1, 2, 3. "911, what is your emergency?" The operator's calm voice filled the room. "Yes, hello," I said, my voice steady and polite. "I'd like to report a disturbance at 425 Oakwood Lane. I have several individuals in my home who are refusing to leave after being asked. They are becoming aggressive, and I am pregnant and fear for my safety. I have the property deed and legal documentation proving my right to the premises." "We have officers in the area, ma'am," the operator replied instantly. "They'll be there in 5 minutes." The effect was instantaneous. The word police cut through their bluster like a knife. These were people who cared about appearances above all else. A squad car in the driveway with flashing lights, neighbors watching from their windows. That was their worst nightmare. You wouldn't," Brandon stammered, looking at the phone in horror. "Try me," I said, my finger hovering over the end call button but not pressing it. "You have 5 minutes before the cops drag you out in handcuffs. Do you really want the neighbors to see that?" Pandemonium erupted. My mother-in-law grabbed her fur coat, muttering curses under her breath about suing me for everything I had. My father-in-law, who had been silent the entire time, finally moved, hastily shoving a bottle of unfinished wine into his jacket pocket. Nate was already at the door, not even looking back at his so-called best friend. They scrambled like rats on a sinking ship. The veneer of sophistication was gone, replaced by the frantic, selfish urge to save their own skins. Brandon was the last one left. He stood by the entryway, looking lost. He reached into his pocket for his car keys. Ah, I said, holding out my hand. "Those keys don't belong to you anymore." He froze. "What? It's my car. It's the company car." "Exactly," I said. "The company in which you just forfeited 80% of your shares. The assets are frozen, Brandon. That includes the Mercedes in the driveway. Hand them over." He stared at me, his jaw working. For a second, I thought he might lunge at me, but then he looked at my stomach and the fight drained out of him. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I would press charges for assault if he so much as breathed on me wrong. Slowly, painfully, he dropped the keys into my palm. "Julia, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. It was the first time I had heard him beg. "It's snowing. It's 10 degrees below zero out there. I don't have a ride. How am I supposed to get anywhere?" "Walk," I suggested. "Or call an Uber, if you can afford one." He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "You can't do this. We're having a baby. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" The audacity, the absolute nerve of this man to use the child he didn't want as a bargaining chip. "Don't you dare," I hissed, stepping into his personal space. "Don't you dare mention this child. You just filed for divorce from us. You made it very clear that we were a burden. You are nothing to this baby but a sperm donor and a monthly check. Now get out before I decide to add emotional abuse to the lawsuit." He looked at me one last time. In his eyes, I saw hatred, yes. But underneath the hate, there was fear and awe. He was realizing too late that the woman he had married wasn't a doormat. She was a fortress. He turned and walked out the door. I watched him go. He stepped out onto the porch, the wind whipping his thin suit jacket around his body. He hunched his shoulders against the biting cold. He looked small, pathetic, a man stripped of his armor. Behind him, his parents were arguing loudly as they got into their own car, not even waiting for him. Nate's car was already gone, tire tracks fresh in the snow. Brandon started walking down the driveway, trudging through the ankle-deep snow. He was alone. I didn't feel sorry for him, not even a little bit. I grabbed the heavy oak door and swung it shut. Boom! The sound echoed through the house, final and absolute. It sounded like the closing of a heavy book. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I slid the chain lock into place. Clack. The house was suddenly very quiet. The screaming was gone. The false laughter was gone. The tension that had vibrated in the air for months had vanished. The only sound left was the gentle crackle of the logs in the fireplace and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a moment, breathing in the silence. It was a lonely silence, yes, but it was clean. It was safe. It was mine. I pushed off the door and walked back into the dining room. The table was a disaster area, spilled wine, half-eaten food, crumpled napkins, but I ignored the mess. I walked to the head of the table, Brandon's chair. I sat down. The chair was large, imposing, like a throne. I had never sat here before. This was the man of the house seat. I picked up my knife and fork. The turkey was still warm. I cut a slice of breast meat, dipped it in gravy, and put it in my mouth. It was delicious. For the first time in years, the food didn't taste like ash. It didn't taste like anxiety. It tasted like freedom. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, no more alcohol for me, and raised it to the empty room. To Julia, I whispered. And then, the tears finally came. They weren't the hysterical, broken sobs Brandon had bet on. They were quiet tears. They slid down my cheeks, hot and cleansing. I cried for the girl who had tried so hard to be loved. I cried for the time I had wasted trying to shrink myself to fit into his small, narrow world. I cried because I had won, but the victory had come at the cost of my innocence. The naive Julia, the one who believed in fairy tales and till death do us part, was dead. She had died tonight on this battlefield. But as I wiped my face and took another bite of dinner, I knew that the woman who replaced her was made of something much stronger. She was made of iron, and she was going to be just fine. The morning sun hit the snow-covered lawn with a blinding brilliance, piercing through the sheer curtains Brandon had chosen. He said they were classy. To me, they just felt like bandages covering a wound that refused to heal. I woke up in the center of the king-sized bed. For the first time in 5 years, I hadn't woken up curled on the edge, subconsciously trying to take up as little space as possible. I stretched my arms out, touching the cool, empty sheets. The silence in the house was profound, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. I got up and made coffee. Strong, black coffee, the kind I drank in the mess hall before Brandon insisted on those weak espresso pods. As the caffeine hit, I felt a surge of energy. Not the frantic energy of combat, but the steady purpose of reconstruction. It was time for a purge. I grabbed heavy-duty contractor bags from the garage and marched upstairs. I started in the master closet, pulling down his Italian suits, his silk ties, his polished dress shoes that cost more than my first car. Rip. Stuff. Into the bag. I didn't fold anything. I treated his treasures with the exact same care he had treated my heart, 0. I dragged 4 bulging bags to the curb. Mrs. Higgins, walking her poodle, stopped and stared. "Spring cleaning," she called out. "Just getting rid of some toxic waste," I replied, dusting off my hands. Back inside, I stripped the bed. I carried the Egyptian cotton sheets downstairs to the gas fireplace and cranked it up. I threw in the framed wedding photos, watching the glass crack and the smiling face of the man I thought I knew turn to ash. It felt primal, necessary. Then, I opened every window. The freezing wind from Lake Michigan roared in, chasing out the stagnant air and the lingering scent of his cologne. I stood in the living room, shivering in my tank top, letting the cold scrub me clean. The house was empty, but for the first time, it felt like mine. That afternoon, I stood naked in front of the hallway mirror. For years, I had avoided mirrors. Brandon's voice had become the narrator in my head. Too muscular, not soft enough. But today, I looked. I saw the scar on my shoulder, the definition in my biceps, the strength in my thighs. It wasn't a delicate body. It was a survivor's body, a machine built for endurance. And it wasn't ugly. It was magnificent. I placed my hands on my lower abdomen. There was no bump yet, just a slight firmness. But I knew life was there. A tiny spark growing in the wreckage. "I'm sorry," I whispered to my reflection. "I'm sorry I chose him for you. You won't have a father who cherishes you." My throat tightened, but I swallowed the tears. "But I promise you this. You will never wonder if you are enough. I will be father and mother. I will be enough for both of us." I realized then that I didn't need a man to complete me. I was a whole entity all on my own. On Sunday, I went to a small, non-denominational chapel nearby. I sat in the back, listening to the choir. The pastor, an older man with a weathered face, read from John 8:32. "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The words hit me like a blow. I bowed my head, letting the tears flow freely. I had lived in a prison of lies, that Brandon loved me, that I was happy. The brutal truth of his betrayal had shattered my world, but the pastor was right. It set me free. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. The mask was off. I could just be. When I got home, Jenny called. "How are you holding up?" "I'm good," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "Well, I have news," Jenny said. "Brandon has been blowing up my office phone. He's desperate. He tried to hire 3 firms to contest the post-nup. They all took one look at the contract and the evidence and told him he's dead in the water." "And M?" Jenny snorted. "History. The second she found out his assets were frozen and he was facing alimony, she ghosted him, blocked him everywhere. Rumor has it she's back on Tinder looking for another wallet. Typical." "It gets better," Jenny continued. "Word about the bet got out. The partners at his firm didn't like the optics. They fired him this morning for conduct unbecoming. He's blacklisted in Chicago finance. Loss of family, loss of lover, loss of career, loss of home." "Where is he?" I asked. "Living in his parents' basement in Naperville, drinking a lot." I waited for the satisfaction, but strangely, I didn't feel anything. The anger was gone, burned out like a fever. "Okay," I said simply. "That's it? Just okay?" "Yeah," I said, watching the snow melt on the driveway. "He's not my husband anymore, Jen. He's just a stranger I used to know. I don't hate him. I just don't care." Indifference, the true opposite of love. He was a ghost now, a footnote in a chapter I'd finished writing. "I have to go, Jen," I said. "I'm painting the nursery." "What color?" "Yellow, bright, sunny yellow." I hung up and walked into the spare room, the place where I used to hide my medals. I opened a can of paint. The smell was fresh and clean. I dipped my brush and made the first stroke on the wall, covering the sterile gray with a vibrant slash of color. My life was a blank canvas again, and this time I was holding the brush. Exactly 365 days have passed since the worst night of my life. The calendar says December 25th again. The snow is falling outside again, blanketing the Chicago suburbs in the same hush of white. But inside my home, everything is different. Last year, the air was thick with tension, smelling of expensive perfume and unspoken judgments. The only sounds were the clinking of crystal and the polite, fake laughter of people who didn't actually like each other. This year, my living room is beautiful, loud, wonderful chaos. There are no stiff suits or velvet dresses. Everyone is wearing ugly Christmas sweaters. Jenny is rocking a bright green pullover with a blinking Rudolph nose. My old squad mate, Gonzalez, flew in from Texas wearing a vest that looks like a tactical Santa suit. The dining table isn't set with fine china. It's covered in a potluck spread: honey-glazed ham, homemade mac and cheese, cornbread, and pies. Nobody is drinking expensive Pinot Noir. We're drinking local craft beer straight from the bottle and spiked eggnog from red plastic cups. The noise level is off the charts. Classic rock plays over the speakers, competing with the boisterous laughter of soldiers retelling war stories. Stories about broken Humvees and terrible MREs that only people who have served in the trenches together can truly appreciate. I looked around the room, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace. This was family. For a long time, I thought family meant blood. But I learned the hard way that blood just makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. Family are the people who pick you up when you're bleeding out. They answer the phone at 2 a.m. during a blizzard. They are the people standing in this room who didn't care if I was a perfect wife, but just loved me because I was Julia. "Hey, Mama Bear," Jenny called out. "Leo is making a break for the tree again." I laughed and hurried over. My son Leo, 10 months old and absolutely fearless, was trying to pull himself up on a low branch of the Douglas fir. He was dressed in a tiny elf oneness that showed off his chubby legs. "No, no, little man," I said, scooping him up. He squealed with delight and grabbed my nose with sticky hands. I carried him to the fireplace, holding him close. He smelled of baby shampoo and milk. He looked up with wide, bright eyes that were alert and kind. He had Brandon's chin, but the rest of him was all me. I looked into his face and made a silent vow. "I am going to raise you to be a real man, Leo," I whispered. "Not a man who thinks power comes from a wallet. Not a man who thinks strength means making a woman feel small. You are going to be kind. You are going to be respectful. You are going to know that feelings aren't weaknesses." I would tell him about his father one day. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't paint Brandon as a monster, because hate is a heavy burden for a child. But I would tell him the truth as a cautionary tale. I would teach him that his father was a man who valued things over people. And I would make sure Leo knew he came from warrior blood. A mother who fought for him before he was even born. I kissed his forehead and handed him to Gonzalez, who was eager to teach the baby a high five. I walked toward the large bay window. The streetlights cast long shadows on the snow, looking exactly like the night I kicked Brandon out. The memory washed over me, but it didn't sting. It felt like watching a movie I'd seen a long time ago. I saw my reflection in the glass. I wasn't the terrified woman in the velvet dress anymore. I was wearing jeans and a sweater. My hair was loose. My shoulders were relaxed. I want to say something to every woman listening to this right now. Maybe you're in a house that feels cold. Maybe you're sitting across from someone who makes you feel hard to love. Maybe you're hiding your bruises. Listen to me. Don't wait for a savior. Prince Charming isn't coming. And if he does, he might be a narcissist in a tailored suit. You have to be your own hero. You have to arm yourself, not with guns. Arm yourself with knowledge. Know your rights. Arm yourself with financial independence. Have freedom money that no one can touch. And most importantly, arm yourself with self-respect. Don't let anyone convince you that you aren't enough. You are a warrior. Whether you're wearing combat boots or an apron. If you are surviving, if you are protecting your peace, you are a soldier. And soldiers don't surrender. We regroup. We re-strategize. And we win. Just then, my phone vibrated. I pulled it out. No caller ID. A strange intuition pricked my neck. I swiped to answer, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. For a few seconds, there was only heavy, wet breathing and background noise, a TV blaring, glass clinking. "Julia?" The voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and self-pity. A ghost's voice. "Julia." "It's me," Brandon rasped. I'm sitting here alone. My parents went to Florida. Nate won't take my calls. I miss you, Jules. I miss the house. I miss us. I was wrong. Can we just talk, please?" I looked across the room at Leo, laughing as Jenny made faces at him. I looked at my chosen family, eating and drinking in the home I fought to keep. I thought about the man on the line, living in a basement, stripped of his ego, drowning in the consequences of his arrogance. He wanted absolution. He wanted me to fix him. A year ago, that call would have broken me. I might have cried. I might have felt guilt. But tonight, I felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, just closure. He was part of a past that didn't exist anymore. I didn't say a word. I didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing my voice. He didn't deserve it. I pulled the phone away. I tapped end call. Then I went into settings and hit block caller. It was a tiny action, but it felt like slamming a heavy iron door shut and welding it sealed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, breathing in the scent of pine and home cooking. I turned back to the party. "Hey, everyone," I shouted, grabbing a fresh beer. The room went quiet. They looked at me, smiling, waiting. I raised my bottle high. The amber liquid caught the Christmas tree lights. I looked at the people who saved me. I looked at my son. I looked at the life I built from the ashes. "I want to propose a toast," I said, my voice steady. "To what, Sarge?" Gonzalez asked. I smiled, a smile that reached my soul. "To freedom," I said. The cheer was loud enough to shake the snow off the roof. "To freedom!" they roared back. Glass clinked against plastic. Laughter erupted again. I took a long sip of my beer, savoring the crisp taste. My real life was just beginning, and it was going to be a beautiful ride. Thank you so much for listening to me story. If you believe in the power of second chances and fighting for your worth, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps us share these stories with more people who need to hear them. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. From all of us here and from Sergeant Julia Gibson, stay strong, stay safe, and never forget your worth. Merry Christmas.